Hey, Tanin. How are you?
Well, how about you?
I'm excellent. So, Tanin, are you ready for the most divisive episode of What Magic Is This that I've done so far?
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. So, pre-show quid pro quo. Tanin, you get one question. It can be any question in the world. It can be, what am I doing for Halloween? It could be, what is my favorite smell? It could be, what is the most interesting archaeological site that I've ever been to? One question, go ahead and ask it.
How do you take your coffee?
I actually don't drink coffee.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Well, I when I did, it was black. My family, they always just drank their coffee black, but I find stimulants really affect me. So about as hardcore as I get is like tea, which I do drink every day, but just in the mornings. But I find if I have any kind of stimulants in the late afternoon, it just wires me up too much. So the coffee thing, yeah, when I did drink coffee, it was black, but I'm a tea person and I enjoy the varieties of tea. There's so many different kinds, but yeah, when I do drink coffee, it's usually like I don't know, an Americano black. So yeah, that's it.
Hey, no shame in that.
It's an interesting taste. It's not my go-to. I like to taste the purity of a black coffee. That's the way I roll.
Nice.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's a good question. My favorite questions for these are always the ones that are like not about magic. It's those are always my favorites. So well done. Perfect.
Awesome.
Hey everybody, welcome to What Magic Is This, a podcast that if it was a person would certainly wear a cloak and carry a cane. In this show, we're going to be talking about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the supernatural, the paranormal, and the weird. And if you've never listened to the program before, basically what happens is that I have a guest on the show. There's going to be a topic, and then we talk about the topic, but for the most part, I do a lot of the talking. Think of this as a bit of a lecture, or maybe a tutoring session where the tutor will do a majority of the talking, but the student or the person getting tutored will be able to ask a question every once in a while. So for the most part, I do a lot of the talking. My guest is a very special guest, somebody who's been a fan of my show for quite a while, and I have plenty of conversations with them on Twitter. Wonderful person to have. That's Tanin. Tanin, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Perfect. So normally my guests get to pick the topic, but we've got a new thing going because I've got a Patreon account now. I ask my patrons what do they want to hear for a certain month for the topics on the show. And number one for the month of October was my last episode. It was drugs and magic. I mean, no real surprise there. But the second was Kabbalah. And so, with that, I was like, all right, well, I guess I've got to do the Kabbalah episode now. It's been long enough, I think, more than a year. So let's give it a shot because everybody loves their Kabbalah. Now, there's a reason I asked Tanin on the show because I think that Tanin's got some very unique perspective on Kabbalah. I think that it would be good to have somebody on the show who has plenty to say about it. So hopefully through this, you guys can be able to get an interesting perspective on what is Kabbalah. So are you familiar with Kabbalah, Tanin?
I am a bit. I think it's kind of impossible to not be
Right.
slightly familiar with at least the topic. I can't promise that I, know even close to everything. I think that that's impossible, actually, with regards to Kabbalah. But in a way, I guess that's the point. But
Exactly. I was going to say, is anybody who tells you that they know everything about Kabbalah or Kabbalah, they're lying to you. They're lying through their teeth. Wonderful. I'm ready to go on this one. First of all, before we get going here, there's going to be a disclaimer, of course. Pronunciation of Kabbalah could be Kabbalah, and you can also spell it with a C, with a Q, with a K. Truthfully, when I say the word Kabbalah, that's the way I say it. Other people will say it Kabbalah, which I believe is probably more correct. Just go back and forth on my pronunciation. Don't jump down my throat for this one. I'm trying, so please. But here's the other thing that needs to be in this disclaimer. So much of what I say is up for debate. And people have been arguing for centuries about Kabbalah. There's going to be interpretations, there's reinterpretations. Kabbalah and debate go hand in hand. There's peaches and cream, and there's debate and Kabbalah. It's just what it is. So in this episode, like the alchemy episode, we can only go so far and perhaps even just scratch the surface or merely glance off of the surface. I want everybody to know there are podcasts out there only on Kabbalah, truthfully, and they can certainly do a better job than I can in one episode. So with that, again, a lot of the terms I'm going to be saying, different pronunciations of it, Sephiroth, Sephirot, this kind of thing. Tanin, you ready?
Heck yeah.
Perfect. So what is Kabbalah? Well, Kabbalah has been described as a Jewish esoteric tradition. It has also been described as Jewish mysticism. Now, I've read debates that this is not solely mysticism, that it is mainly oral and in a constant state of evolution through the ages. So, with that, what is Kabbalah? A way of understanding yourself and God and how they relate to each other, how everything relates to each other, for receiving divine knowledge to guide your life and create a union with God. The word Kabbalah can also mean a couple of different things. I've heard that it is tradition, it just stands for tradition, but the more common one that I've come across was that it means receiving or to receive. Have you heard this as well, Tanin?
Yeah, I've also heard that it can translate as well to correspondence.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think is interesting, and correspondence in a conversational way, not in a, literally writing a letter to someone way.
Right. People that tuned into the last episode with Danny Nemu, he kind of said, like, there's certain words in Hebrew can mean plenty of different things, and that's just what's amazing about the language, Hebrew itself. So there's going to be a lot of that in this episode. So what needs to be understood about Kabbalah, and this is something I quite like about it, is that every action in this world affects the world of the divine. So it has been said that Kabbalah is one of the core elements of the Western occult tradition. I would argue, however, and here we go, that I know, that while influential, it is certainly influential, its role historically has been greatly overemphasized to a harmful degree. And so with that, let's talk about the kinds of Kabbalah. And now these distinctions are incredibly arbitrary, and they're my distinctions. And this is just from what I've gathered. And these distinctions seem to go across both Jewish traditional Kabbalah and Hermetic practical Kabbalah. It's theoretical, meditative, and magical. So with the first one, theoretical, this mainly deals with inner dimensions of reality. So they have spiritual worlds, they talk about the soul or souls, angels. It's fairly heavy on the Zohar, which is something I'll bring up in a little bit. But this is the vast majority of Kabbalah. This is where most of the debating happens within Kabbalah. Again, people have been debating and reinterpreting this kind of thing for so long. It's also a lot about contemplation being the main tool for understanding Kabbalah. The second is meditative. This is a bit more practical. It has theoretical aspects, certainly, but it also uses the Hebrew alphabet and things like gematria, which I talked about in the Aleister Crowley Liber 777 episode. And meditation is the main way of interacting with this form of Kabbalah. So you're meditating on divine realms to bring about change somehow. And it's highly personal, yet hopefully a bit more of this world than theoretical Kabbalah. And then the last one is magical Kabbalah. So this is entirely practical, and it's about altering and influencing the courses of nature. And it's about divine names, it's about divine interactions, amulets, seals, etc., etc. So most Jews versed in Kabbalah say that magical Kabbalah is forbidden, that it is perceived as being, best maybe looked at, but not so much dabbled in. Others will say that what is being practiced now is complete nonsense, and that true magical Kabbalah was entirely oral and for all intents and purposes is now extinct, and that the knowledge is completely forgotten. So make of that what you will.
It's impossible to really like nail down exactly where these things kind of change over to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
I've also heard that, in order to safely practice Kabbalah, you have to be 40 years old,
Right.
male, your children have left the house, like that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think the part of that is that you no longer have to necessarily worry about tending to your kids. When you reach 40, at least in the old days, that meant that you were certainly able to maybe concentrate more on these things. And likewise, the way that Jewish homes were structured was vastly different than it is today.
Yeah, I have heard that before as well. It's kind of like make sure that you've done some living in the world, you've taken care of your own, and then you can have some fun. And then once you got some boxes checked off and it's all taken care of, then you can have a little bit of a dalliance with the Kabbalah. So I like that. I think that's interesting. Let's talk a bit of the history because I mean it's not what magic is this without a little bit of history. Some say that originally Kabbalah was transmitted to Adam by God or by the angel Raziel, that Moses also received 2 sets of teachings on Mount Sinai. He got the 5 books of the Old Testament, and then he was given another set of oral teachings, and then that this master-to-student interaction, which became Kabbalah itself. So historically, though, mystical groups in the 11th century in France and the 12th century in Spain were kind of where we can look and see the origin of what we know. If we squint, we can kind of be like, oh, that's probably where historically Kabbalah started. There were people that were still traditional Jews, still following all the protocols, but it's just that they had an extra something something. It wasn't like the Cathars and Catholics. I think a lot of people that were practicing within Kabbalah was just a little extra that they had, and they were still part of the community, which is excellent. Now, it developed a great deal in Spain, particularly through an individual who I will talk about in a little bit. It's by the name of Abraham Abulafia. There was also Moses of Leon, who wrote the Zohar. Again, talk about that in a little bit. If there was a golden age of Kabbalah, I would say it was probably from the 12th century to the 15th century in Spain. Is this what you've come across as well, Tanin?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. Kabbalah did become interesting to other figures, specifically people that were not Jewish, people like Raymond Lull and Pico della Mirandola and others, who I will talk about in a little bit. They were always... What we need to understand is that persecution has followed Jews, no matter where they are, throughout history. It's just it happens, and it's a really unfortunate aspect of specifically a European culture. So many felt that they had to convert to Christianity in these areas, and many of these converts from Judaism to Christianity, they would be instrumental in influencing others during the Renaissance and with Christian interpretations of Kabbalah. In 1492, probably one of the biggest things happened in the history of Kabbalah, which is that all Jews were expelled from Spain. The crown just basically kicked all of the Jews out of Spain, which was a huge shock for pretty much all of Europe. But there were some good aspects. There was some certain spread of ideas, particularly in places like Italy and Germany, but also in North Africa, Turkey, and in Israel, specifically in a town called Safed, which was home to one Isaac Luria. More on him later. Kabbalah, it was somewhat widely spread over somewhat large territory, but it diminished over time with a popular form of Kabbalah by the Hasidic movement founder. His name is Baal Shem Tov. And within the 19th century, with something called, going to butcher this pronunciation, but Hakala, which is known as the Enlightenment, in the 18th century. You know a bit more about this than I do. So what was this Enlightenment, Tanin?
With regards to the Enlightenment in the 19th century, it was kind of an effort on the part of Jewish leaders in Germany, I think, in order to smooth down the edges and make sure that we could safely assimilate in wider culture, to make it clear to our Goyish neighbors, our Christian neighbors, that there was nothing to worry about, that we were just as normal as they were. And as a result of that, a lot of our traditions actually kind of fell by the wayside,
Okay.
including the understanding of shadim, of demons, of forms of effectively fairies, good neighbors, who were effectively like nature spirits. They were called Shrei-Telik. And it's, to me, really a tragedy. I think that these days there's a greater effort on the part of Jewish magicians to reclaim a lot of what was lost.
Right. Was this mainly just because of something like having to convert to Christianity to just be able to live like some kind of a life? Like, was this the major motivating force for this enlightenment?
As far as I'm aware, it was partially to make it clear to the Christians around Jewish towns that there was nothing for them to fear anymore, that there wasn't the, supposed child sacrifice, a thing that has never happened ever, that there was no well poisoning, that there was no whatever terrifying Jewish boogeyman they had erected in their minds wasn't in existence. So
there's a really wonderful book called The Age of Secrecy by Daniel Jute, where he basically goes through 12th century to the 18th century, just about the contribution and how a lot of people that were Jewish were viewed as being, well, they were viewed with suspicion, but they were also viewed as they had a secrecy about them, that it was harmful in a way, but also in a way it allowed for certain aspects of Jewish knowledge to be involved in not just occult philosophy, but in European culture in general. And it's a fantastic book. I don't know if you read it, Tanin, but it's a wonderful, wonderful book.
I'll have to check that out. I have also been personally wanting to investigate more the history of shtetls, which is what my family has come from for hundreds of years. We fled a Russian shtetl in the 1800s to get away from the Tsar's pogroms at the time.
Right.
I mean, living in a shtetl alone must have been terrifying. I hate to bring up Fiddler on the Roof, but it's kind of the best example in at least modern popular culture that you can have of how scary and othering it must have been to know at any moment that some people from the next town over could come and kill everyone or burn down your town and not face any kind of repercussions for it.
Right.
And then the next day, everything's almost normal to them,
Yeah. It's an area of investigation that is luckily getting a bit more light shed on it, and it's one of those things where, given that the podcast has taken a big chunk out of my time, but it's one of those areas, specifically because of this book, I want to know about this a bit more, but it seems to be a large part of European history. Yeah, absolutely. Now, since this Enlightenment, rediscovery and reinterpretation has occurred seemingly every decade about Kabbalah. Kabbalah to this day remains incredibly appealing, and for very good reasons, because it is a mystical, somewhat self-contained, very complex system that is, what's the best way of putting it? It seems very other to a lot of people, and it does seem like there is a great deal to be gained from study of Kabbalah. So, before we go into any more, what is Kabbalah about? Basically, it depends who you ask. And I know that sounds like such a cop-out, but it is very true.
That's, in some ways, a very Jewish answer.
Yeah. So a couple of words might come up. And again, my pronunciation is going to be terrible. One of the words is Sakina, which I believe means divine eminence or a presence of God interaction. So this is something that might be one of the main objectives of Kabbalah. It could also be something like uniting the feminine aspect of God with the more masculine aspects of God. It could also be to see the divinity in all things as they emanate from and to the infinite. Could also, an objective could be to better yourself and therefore the universe, as all is seemingly one. Also, one of the things, and I think this is something that I quite resonate with, was that is to be the change in all things. That up there is and always has been within. It could be about wisdom that allows for wisdom to be revealed, to create an increase of essence somehow. I've heard it said that it's a search that always reveals new secrets. It's just infinite in constant study and in constant interaction with Kabbalah. Best summed up by Isaac of Akko. He says this: "Strive to see the supernal light, for I have brought you to a vast ocean. Be careful. Strive to see, yet escape drowning." So, if everything I've just said seems very imprecise, that's just it. Kabbalah seemingly is somewhat imprecise, at least from where I'm standing. And so pinning it down is somewhat impossible, as I've said, and as Tanin has said. The complexity of Kabbalah is staggering. It's staggering. For centuries of traditions and reinterpretations will tend to do something like that. It's constantly being reinterpreted and added to.
I think that it's an attempt to understand the Godhead almost,
Right.
of trying to understand as well that in everything there exists life. That is a very core Jewish teaching, that, it's not that there's anything split off from Hashem, that everything is Hashem. And I think that Kabbalah really strives to try and find that out.
Right. Once you start to really get into it, it's a very incredible way of trying to see some kind of a framework or a way of existence, a way of being, which is why I use the term way, because, again, it could be an esoteric tradition, it could be a mysticism, but to me it seems more like a way of being, of understanding, of wisdom. That's the main thing. Let's talk about a few figures and texts. So the first text I'm going to bring up is called the Sefer Yetzirah, which means Book of Formation. Now, this is probably the oldest existent book of Kabbalah. Now, some say that it was written in and around 100 BCE to, it could be 900 CE. So that's a fairly large period of time in which this book could have been written. It goes through letters of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And it has correspondences for all 22 letters, and it has meditative practices for each. So if interested in Kabbalah, this is certainly a book that needs to be read. And I have read it years and years ago, and it is indeed an interesting document. Have you read this book, Tanin?
No, not yet.
It's fairly popular, and you can find copies of it online, but it's definitely worth going through. Abraham Abulafia. Interesting figure, incredibly interesting figure. He was born in the 13th century in Saragossa, Spain. He studied the scripture and Talmud. He left Spain to go to the Holy Land, but he was forced to leave because at the time there was a crusade. Now, if you know your history, there has been quite a few crusades to the Holy Land, and Abulafia, he had to leave because of this. From there, he traveled to Greece, he traveled to Rome, and then he found himself back in Spain, specifically in Barcelona. Maybe one of my favorite places on earth. It's wonderful. He was big on meditating on Hebrew words and letters to get some kind of a journeying effects, like deep meditation and understanding of scripture, of the Talmud, to be able to get yourself into a state, like to a very different state. This didn't make him friends, specifically within Orthodox Judaism, but he was a very pious man. He did eventually claim that he had prophetic powers. And this led him to, at one point, try to convert the Pope to Judaism. It's an interesting story. I'll just give you a quick summary of it. On his way, he received word that should he go to Rome and attempt this to convert the Pope to Judaism, that he would be burnt if he tried to do so. And he went anyways. He said, fuck it, I'm going for it. I don't care anymore. Let's try and stop me. The day he arrived in Rome, he found out that the Pope had died the night before. This was viewed with a bit of suspicion. He was sent to prison, where he spent a short period of time there, and he was eventually released. And then I believe he went back to Spain. He was not popular within the Jewish population within Barcelona. And again, Spain was, in and around this time, kind of the center of Kabbalah and Kabbalistic studies. So, yeah, that's Abraham Abulafia. I like the guy. I like this idea of meditating on words to get your journey on. It's very interesting, and I don't know if you've experienced it, Tanin, but every once in a while when I'm really interested in something, I will just dive in head first, and I notice something happening when I start rereading and speaking aloud certain things. Like it really sends you into a different place. Have you experienced this at all, ever?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly really intriguing as well from the perspective of words literally being magic in
Yeah,
the Torah. God literally saying, "Let there be light," and
right.
light happened, right?
Yeah. In the beginning was the word, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And certainly having mantras and saying mantras aloud, some of them it really feels as though time is slowing down or speeding up or
Yeah.
just something's happening.
Absolutely. Back in my, I guess, baby chaos magic era or development, I think I came up with a word for this very phenomenon because I would just, when I get interested in things, I mean, you could throw the ADHD term out there, but I get so hyper focused on something that it really does send me into a very different state. And it's not a normal state of mind. It's just almost as if, you can start seeing connections everywhere. And you really almost do. It's not an out of body experience, but it almost feels like your real self is sitting next to you while this other being of pure research is just going crazy. Yeah, back in the day, I was like, this is a new phenomenon I've came up with, and then you read Abraham Abulafia, and you're like, oh, well, never mind. This guy's got it all anyway, so he's got it. Nah, well, what can you do? Abulafia, definitely worth checking out. We got to talk about the Zohar. Now, the Zohar is the most important text of Kabbalah, bar none. Now, scholars say that it was written between about 1270 and 1300 by Moses de Leon in Guadalajara, Spain. But others say that, of course, that it came from way before, but it was just Moses of Leon who was doing most of the writing. It's huge. I mean, it's enormous. It's gargantuan. And to even try and summarize it right now would be impossible. Like, you can't. To try and summarize the Bible, I mean, I guess you could try the Old Testament, and I guess you could try and summarize the New Testament, but the Zohar is one, like, it's dense. Like, it really is incredibly dense. Have you had a look at the Zohar ever, Tannen?
Yeah, it's a big, big book. I personally don't feel as though I might ever have the scholarship under my belt to really ever be able to understand it fully. I
Yeah.
think that really you have to dedicate just absolutely years of your life to swimming in the sea of not only the Torah, but of, some aspects of Jewish culture and history to really understand it.
Yeah. It is one of those things where literally, people have devoted their entire lives to the Zohar. That has been their lives. Like scholars, there's people alive right now that is what they are doing. It's incredible. It really is. So we have to talk about the second figure here, and his name is Isaac Luria Ashkenazi. He was born in 1534, and he passed away in 1572. In my opinion, and this is one that is shared by quite a few people, he is the bee's knees. He is the most influential Kabbalist of all time. He was born in Jerusalem. The Zohar was his book. He was one of those people that went to Safed, Israel, and he became the leader of a small group of disciples in Safed. He has the best Kabbalistic takes, and if you read Luria, because Luria didn't really write too much, it was mostly people interpreting what Luria had to say, which is very important. But he was very much about introduction of new concepts of a process of the fall and the redemption of the universe. He introduced a concept called breaking the vessels, which you might hear if you start to study Kabbalah in any way, and that there was a cosmic mistake somehow, but that the universe can be redeemed. For generations after his death, his approach to Kabbalah was pretty much standard and has remained that way for a very good reason. For my money, Luria is the guy.
I find him a very interesting figure. I love the story of Elijah the prophet appearing to his father and saying, that I've been sent by God to bring you tidings that your wife shall conceive and bear a child,
Right.
and that you must call him Yitzhak or Isaac. He shall begin to deliver Israel from the husks or the kilipot, and through him numerous souls will receive their wisdom, basically.
Yes, exactly. I believe it was Luria who was the one who first introduced the concept of the Klepoth, and again, I'm pronouncing that totally wrong, but which is so popular, shall we say, with left-hand path magicians or people trying to look at the more dark side of things. But I think it was, Luria. That was the one that I could get a slap on the wrist for that, but I'm pretty sure it was him. But yeah, he's a very interesting character. And looking up, I mean, again, he didn't write very much, but it was the stories. Luria is a very important figure in this regard. For my money, he's a guy that definitely, if the Kabbalah is interesting to you, a lot of what you're going to read is from Isaac Luria, but it's also really interesting to look at the people that Isaac Luria influenced, definitely. Finally, just one last little figure, and this is a somewhat newer figure. His name is Gershom Scholem. He was born in 1897, and he passed away in 1982. Now, he was a German-born Israeli historian and philosopher. He was the founder of modern study of Kabbalah. Our modern understanding of Kabbalah is pretty much almost all thanks to this one man. And all of his work is crucial to understanding Kabbalah, in my opinion. It still reads very well these days. His lectures, you can find them online, or you can buy them in book form. They're really quite wonderful. And he is a monumental figure, I think, and he's definitely worth looking into if Kabbalah is of interest to you.
Yes, he is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I love the guy, and he lived a long life. My goodness, he was there for quite some time. But yes, I think the people that I brought up, those three figures and those two books, definitely worth looking into. So some of you might be asking, what does this have to do with magic? Now, magic enters the picture kind of right before the Renaissance, or probably during the Renaissance. Now, the term Christian Kabbalah is used. I'm not a huge fan of the term. I think it's better said as being Christian interpretation of the Kabbalah. It wasn't entirely practical. So you had figures like Raymond Lull, and you had this other gentleman by the name of Pico della Mirandola, who did a lot of work with Kabbalah in his 900 Theses. And you also have a figure by the name of Jonathan Reuchlin, who I believe is one of the first people to write any tract on the Kabbalah outside of Hebrew. Now, what needs to be understood, again, to just kind of go back to the history of Kabbalah, is that, what's the best way of putting this? Again, there was a ton of persecution of anybody who was Jewish. A lot of these Jews had to convert. They felt that they needed to convert to Christianity. And so
it was convert or die,
yeah.
To be honest. It was either you convert right now to Christianity, or we will put you to the sword.
Yeah.
Or worse.
Yeah.
Which is horrifying.
Very. You can't even imagine. I mean, it is happening in some parts of the world right now, but just on a large, massive scale. It really is, as Tanin said, convert or you're done. You're dead. You're dead if you don't convert. And so a lot of these people that converted, they were somewhat open to talking to certain figures and letting them in on what this Kabbalah is. And so you had, as the figures that I've mentioned, Mirandola. What needs to be understood, and specifically if you go through their work, is that you start to realize, and more people are talking about this now because it needs to be said, is that they were not these great defenders of Judaism or Hebrew. In fact, they had respect for some individuals, I'm sure, but they were more about taking the ideas or the thoughts of Kabbalah and Judaism and using them against the Jews and using their mysticism against the Jewish population. And not just that, but also saying, look, You guys don't know your mysticism as well as we, who are Christians, do. We know your Kabbalah better than you do because it fits in a Christian framework better than it fits in your framework. We can bring in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, the Holy Trinity. We can show you how Moses was the Platonic magician, wizard par excellence. This was all part of this process, and so it was. I'm just going to say it was not a very helpful era for Kabbalah at this time. And specifically, if you go to look at the Christian interpretation of Kabbalah, it's more about taking the thought and then using it for your own means, and for many times against the Jews themselves. And so this is not a good thing at all in any way. But it is from this that you get figures such as Marsilio Ficino, but the more important figure that we have to look at, specifically as far as magic and Kabbalah, is Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. Now, I've talked about him already, and I've said quite a bit about him. At best, his reinterpretation is, and you can read books on this, specifically, I believe it's I forget the name of the book, but it's by Christopher Lerich. He just says that, it's an interpretation. This is Agrippa's Kabbalah. It's him looking at Christian Kabbalah, whatever that is, and then having his little spin on it. At worst, it is a complete misuse of Kabbalah. If you go through it, a lot of it is like, well, I don't know what Agrippa is trying to say here. For there, it goes a little bit underground for a little bit, and it's not until about 1801 that you get a guy called Francis Barrett who writes a book, which is basically he just steals everything from Agrippa and from Peter de Albano, the author of, or the pseudo-author, who knows, of the Heptameron, in his book The Magus. And so that's, 1801. It was published after Barrett passed away. Then it lies dormant again for a little while until you have Eliphas Levi, or Eliphas Levi, who, just, it's like, Kabbalah and everywhere. Just put it everywhere. Let's cover the whole, everything. Magic is Kabbalah. And guess what? Also, the 22 trumps of the tarot, that's actually the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Look, it all fits. It all makes sense, and all of this fun stuff. And so eventually we get to a group called the Golden Dawn, who they just basically took everything from Agrippa, and they took everything from Levi, including the lesser banishing ritual, and it just became the foundation. So and they used, I believe you might be able to correct my pronunciation, the Oats Chaim, which is the tree of life, which is the diagram that a lot of us see. If you Google Kabbalah, it's the first thing that's going to pop up if you click on the images tab. Like it's this tree that's got 22 paths and 10 nodes, or sephirot, or sephiroth. And I don't need to go through this again. I've already gone through it with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn episode. You know what? Fuck it. Let's go through it again. So here we go. Again, without taking any of the thought process of the very little of the tradition of Judaism, and just kind of wholesale taking it from Agrippa, the way that what would be later called Hermetic Kabbalah was this. So everything is connected. Okay, cool. You have 4 planes. You have Atziluth, which is the divine. You have Bria, which is the creative realm. And then you have Yetzirah, which is, I guess, like what we would consider the astral realm. Might get a slap on the wrist. And then you have Asya, which is the material realm. That's where we find ourselves now. Everything manifest comes from emanations of the Godhead, the One. There's 3 of these. There's Ein, which is nothing. There's Ein Sof, which is infinite. And then there's Ein Sof Or, which is limitless light. There are 10 emanations, and those are called Sephiroth. And the Sephiroth are thus: at the very top, you've got Kether, which means crown. Then you go to Hokmah, which means wisdom, to Bina, which means understanding, to Keshed, which means mercy, Gabura, which means strength, then Tiporeth, which means beauty, Netzach, which means victory, Hod, which means splendor, Yeshod, which means foundation, and then finally Malkuth, which means kingdom. 10 nodes, 22 paths between them. We've all seen this image. I believe it's called the Kircher tree. Yeah, there you go. So they thought that by contemplation or astral interaction with these Sephiroth along the paths is a magician's work, and that everything in existence maps to this tree of life. The 32 points, the 10 Sephiroth, the 22 paths. There you go. And everything has a nice little compartment that it goes into, and yes, and it's your job as a magician to use this framework to be a better magician. Basically. I don't know, would you agree or disagree with that assessment of Golden Dawn Hermetic Kabbalah, Tanin?
I mean, that seems as close to a good summary as I've ever heard, to be honest.
Okay. I try. I really do try. And then that's it, basically. And then when Israel Regardie republished the Golden Dawn material, since then we've all thought that the Kabbalah, and this, I mean, I might get a slap on the wrist, that this kind of Kabbalah is the kind of Kabbalah that Kabbalists have always used. And that is a big no. But that's just what they were going on. But in a strange way, the 19th century magicians were kind of doing the same thing that those who put on a Christian interpretation of the Kabbalah, they were basically saying almost, look, we 19th century stuffy English people know your mysticism better than you do. And that sucks. I don't like that. I'm not a fan of that. I'm just going to say it right here. So, I don't know. Do you have any hot takes on Hermetic Kabbalah, Tanin?
I mean, other than the fact that it's almost entirely nonsense.
Yeah.
Perhaps the hottest take so far that I've had.
Yeah.
But, I mean, to be quite honest, I don't think that you can remove Kabbalah from a Jewish context and still make it function.
Right.
And that's almost entirely what the Golden Dawn tried to do.
Yeah. Golden Dawn, and then it's pretty big in Thelema. It's if you go into any bookstore, any occult bookstore, besides the New Age stuff, it's mostly going to be Hermetic Kabbalah. It's all in there. Guess what? Your tarot's got it. I mean, some people are reclaiming the tarot, which is good, but they all go through this 32 points on the tree of life, and they have to understand this. And I just go, what? Like, I really don't get it. So I call it a boondoggle. I call it is a boondoggle. So let's again start with this magical boondoggle. Again, the Christian interpretation of the Kabbalah, those people that were taking this, basically saying that we know it better than you do. Look, haha, stupid. This is it. You guys don't even know your own system of mysticism. To Agrippa, right. And again, as I said in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn episode, the Golden Dawn certainly took what was like a boulder on, because the 3 books of occult philosophy of Agrippa, there is Kabbalah in there, but it's not the only thing. There's plenty of other stuff in there. But the Golden Dawn took this boulder and they made it into a planet for themselves. And they made it into the universe of the way that magic works. So, persecution followed the Jews absolutely everywhere. Many had to convert. Again, Pico and Ficino. Previously, we thought that they were kindly towards Jews and towards their thought, but in truth, they wanted to use the thought against Jews for basically a new Neoplatonic Christianity. They took from Dionysius the Areopagite, I believe, just to have this celestial hierarchy. And they did that shit. They did do that shit where they took the what. That's it. The what, the product of Jewish mysticism, but not the how or the why of Jewish mysticism. And this can certainly be used against the Jews, and it ostracized them further. This idea that you don't even know your own mysticism. It bothers me. And this is something that we have a huge problem with, specifically for those that are trying to, I guess the word is decolonize magic, is that we're very enamored, or we have been very enamored with loving the product of what people have to say specifically about the esoteric or the mystical, and then just taking that without their mind or their metaphysics at all. And I think this is a very dangerous bullshit. I don't know. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
It continued, and it continued through Agrippa, to Levi, to the Golden Dawn, to Crowley, and what we have now that passes for modern magic, basically. But The problem is that the folks in the 19th century, they didn't have a ton of context that we do have now. Again, a lot of this research is fairly new, and a lot of people are doing very good work at looking back at the historical concepts of the Christian interpretation of the Kabbalah. And so I would ask people, if you do consider yourself a Hermetic Kabbalist or a practical Kabbalist, do some work, do some digging, and start to see where the problems start to arise. And they are there, and it's very apparent. It is not a pleasant picture, at least not to me. And I will have a couple of show notes on this. And it's right there. You really can't deny this. It's troublesome, and it's about how you stay with this trouble, truthfully. Most magical dalliances with Kabbalah are a misuse, especially when many modern magicians don't have the required background to explore Kabbalah as it was meant to be studied and used. The Tree of Life and the Realms, they were meant to be meditation models for Kabbalah to indicate the interaction between creation and creator, not so much for the correspondences, which is what we have now, that everything is connected, everything is this and that. They never meant for it to be a cosmological framework.
From what I understand, yeah, it's really not meant to be a flowchart in a holy office or something, or some kind of
filing cabinet.
Yeah, it's not a filing cabinet. It's not, the steps in a Boy Scout troop or something where
Right.
you now get to graduate on to Eagle Scout after getting to Yesod or something. It's not that at all.
No. Like with all things, and I will repeat this, like with all things, stay with the trouble, because it's there, and it is apparent. Maybe one of the worst places, and I've said this probably not in this podcast, but in somebody else's podcast, is that one of the worst places to get your history of magic from is from other magicians. There's very few magicians that I trust to talk about the history of magic that are very pertinent, and that's just how it goes right now. So let's talk about the big one. That Kabbalah is the largest part of the Western magical tradition. Here's the thing. The more you look into the history of magic, the less Kabbalah you see. It's strange. Besides a ward or two, very few grimoires, actual magical documents up to the 18th century, have Kabbalah in them. And it doesn't mean that if there's Hebrew words in there, that does not mean specifically that it is Kabbalah. This needs to be understood. We do have this idea that until Agrippa and Ficino, that old, dirty ritual magic was shed in favor of a natural magic or a high magic, the stuff with Kabbalah in it. Turns out this is not the case at all, and documents show it. It's there. We can't deny it. And these are documents that have been translated quite recently, a lot of them. And you keep searching. It's like, well, besides the 6th and 7th book of Moses, and besides this, like there's really not a ton of it in there. Once Agrippa enters into the French blue grimoire tradition, then Kabbalah starts to enter in as well. And it's almost as if the word Kabbalah just takes the place for any word that just means something mysterious. And it's not Kabbalah. It's at all, usually, at all, in any way. It's just like a catchphrase or some letters or just like the thought. Anytime that they try to, and you have to draw the Kabbalistic circle, I believe that's in like the Grand Grimoire. It's like, what? I don't know where that came from. It just kind of sounds like you just threw that in there. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
After a while, Kabbalah really became the super convenient way to make somebody seem mysterious or make something seem even more mystical than it really was.
To this day.
Yeah, even to today.
I don't get it. Anyways, it's frustrating. I didn't know if anybody, when they clicked on this podcast, that they'd get another Doug Rants episode, but I should have put that in the disclaimers. But yeah, here's another Doug Rants episode. You're all welcome. I love it. I don't know what you guys think about it, but I have fun. There might be people who are like, well, hey, hang on there, Doug. You got D, and you have Agrippa, so that's Dr. John D. They stand firmly in the tradition of old medieval demonic and angelic magic than they do in this natural high magic. It needs to be understood. Yeah, the Golden Dawn used bits of Dr. John D. And yes, John D. studied in some way his whatever Kabbalah he had, but truthfully, that's a bit of a hint. D studied everything. He didn't rank in importance what was more. He did astrology, mathematics, Kabbalah. That was him. He's unlike any figure within magic, which is what makes him very, very magnetic to us. But Kabbalah and ritual magic is overemphasized. It's inflated. A 19th century revision. But make no mistake, Kabbalah, Christian Kabbalah usually, was a hot thing in the Renaissance. Look at it this way. Let's see if this flies, because this is something that I've been tinkering with for the last 5-6 years. Imagine that in 300 years from now, musicians look back at the 1980s and said, there's some good music produced in the 80s and the 90s. Really good music. I wonder what they have that we don't. They look back and they go, oh, my goodness, there's this thing called the keytar. All right. This might be why there was so much great music in the 80s and the 90s. And then these musicians, 300 years in the future, decided that the keytar was the foundation for all music up to then, and that they should bring back the keytar so that they can replicate the great hits of the 80s and the 90s, the golden age of music, in my opinion. Problem is, these days, those that have a more rounded historical understanding of ritual magic, they get passed over for those old gift shop books of magic, the things that I talked about in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn episode. Again, these books, they're chock-a-block. They're just full of a practical and a Hermetic view of Kabbalah through tarot cards, I've even seen it applied to astrology. It's like, what is going on here? It frustrates me. I don't know, Tanin, how you feel about it, but...
We've had a few different discussions about how I feel about it for sure. It doesn't feel good, I guess we'll say, to know that almost, I don't know how much, but certainly a great amount of the Western corpus of magic relies on anti-Semitism. It doesn't feel good to know that all of this stuff has been taken by people who were terrified for their lives, who were persecuted for not even doing Kabbalah or magic, but just living their lives.
Yeah.
We have stories of Jews who were told not to throw dirt after themselves when leaving the cemetery because, their Christian neighbors would freak out and assume that they were doing magic.
Right.
We have stories of Christians demanding that Jews give them Sabbath wine, basically, on the Friday, in order to heal their bishop or something of a deadly illness. We have stories of people's mezuzah, getting cut up. People would stick knives into Jewish mezuzah to, destroy the scrolls inside of that. And in some ways, we're still unspooling, and I think we will be unspooling and undoing a lot of the work that was done to harm people.
It should have started a long time ago, but for some reason, this still remains. It still hangs on. We're still using these misuses for some strange reason. I don't...
In 2020, it shouldn't be a hot topic or a hot take for me to say that we really need to re-examine how much suffering was extracted, I guess, when these Goyish magicians did all of this stuff.
You said you found a quote or two from a book.
Oh, I did. So I'm just going to go on record, I suppose, and say that I highly recommend the work of Rabbi Joshua Trachtenberg. His work is older. He was writing in 1935, 1939. So, yeah, let's think about what happened around that time. But one of his books is actually for free online on sacred texts. It's called Jewish Magic and Superstition. I'm not saying to use what you find in there for your own aims. I am, however, saying that educating yourself on this is very important. Yeah. So it's possible that there is, and highly likely, I would hope, that there is more modern scholarship, but Trachtenberg is, to me, a very important figure in 20th century understanding of what happened. So anyway, that aside, I guess. This is coming from The Devil and the Jews, which was written in 1939, or published in 1939, I should say. And this is on page 79 in at least my copy. So it was practical Kabbalah in a theosophical dress that Christians found the easier and the more desirable to assimilate. It became a prized adjunct of astrology and alchemy, a marvelous magic apparatus in the general view. Jewish elements were soon absorbed and so transposed as to remain Jewish in name only. Since the 16th century, There has grown up a vast library of Kabbalistic texts, so-called a new Christian Kabbalah, that speedily parted company with its ostensible parent and ventured off in other directions wholly on its own. The term Kabbalah became synonymous with magic under this new dispensation. Civil attacks upon Jews specifically as sorcerers was quite rare in the earlier centuries. The subsidiary charges such as poisoning and blood accusations, and the rest which we shall shortly consider, were then still persuasive enough to serve a sufficient pretext. But when the Reformation destroyed the effectiveness of some of the most popular earlier accusations, coincidentally, with the startling revelation of the Kabbalah, the sorcery accusation came into its very own. So, I mean, basically in the medieval era, it wasn't that, there were Jewish magicians as much as to many Christians at the time, Jews just were magic.
They were,
period.
Yeah, they were all sorcerers.
Yeah, and I also can't imagine how terrifying that must have been to have your neighbors think that just because you exist, you're a sorcerer, and in a bad way, I should mention.
Yeah.
It wasn't that they thought that these people were powerful in a beneficial light, but rather that they could be doing harm to you at any given moment, and that you had to punish them in order to make it clear that, Christian supremacy was key.
Yeah, and the work is starting to be done. Again, it's not that it's too late, but at least it's happening. But I would like for more people to try and look at certain areas of history, Middle Ages to now, just about how this thing happens over and over again. And it's important. I do think it is very important.
The book Grimoires by Owen Davies also
Great book.
Goes into the history of how this was really derived from Jewish texts as well. So that could be a good resource too.
Absolutely. It'll be in the show notes.
Hell yeah.
So what gives with this Kabbalah and magic? So why can't people let go? For some, they confuse occult philosophy with magic, and occult philosophy is a term that I'm not a fan of. I get it. Some people would prefer to be a mystic than a magician, and try not to conflate the two. For many people, when they start off with magic, all right, we have this new thing. It's the tree of life. It's a new model. Great. I can use this model where everything fits together and everything has its own place, and then I can walk around and I can say oh, well, this means door in Hebrew, and it's funny because that's connected to this, and so it's congrats, great, you're an occult philosopher. But truthfully, it's just you are vanilla ice cream with occult philosophy sprinkles on top. Now, I don't see magic as merely a continuation of the process of expanding your philosophic pedigree by looking into esotericism. Constant debate and defending of certain esotericisms isn't for me. I'm just going to say that. Some people, they never get out of first-year university by looking into these and just being yeah, great, I'm a Kabbalist, or I use a Kabbalistic framework. Great, wonderful. But understand this, though. Kabbalah is vast. It's complex. Here, I'll open a copy of The Essential Kabbalah by Daniel C. Matt. I'm just going to stop it at any place. All right, so here's a little taster. Being is in nothingness, in the mode of nothingness, and nothingness is being in the mode of being. Nothingness is being, and being is nothingness. The node of being, as it begins to emerge from nothingness into existence, is called faith. For the term faith applies neither visible, comprehensible being, nor to nothingness, invisible and incomprehensible, but rather to the nexus of nothingness and being. Being does not stem from nothingness alone, but rather from being and nothingness together. All is one in the simplicity of absolute undifferentiation. Our limited mind cannot grasp or fathom this, for it joins infinity. That, you can literally spend 10 years just taking that one paragraph apart, right? So that's it. And that is certainly not in one of those things. I mean, you can get glimpses of it in Hermetic and Practical Kabbalah, sure. All right, you can. But here's the thing. And even Practical and Hermetic Kabbalah, it is complex as well. Certainly not as complex as picking up the Zohar, but do not conflate complexity with depth. Complexity means complexity. Please understand this. It truly takes a lifetime of study, Kabbalah. It does. And in a way, I kind of agree with others that would say, if you consider yourself a Kabbalist, that's pretty much all you can do. That's the rest of your life right there. So, not to gatekeep, but I hope that people know what I mean when I talk about that the minor dalliances with Kabbalah, just because it's supposedly the hinge point on which all Western magical tradition is from. In a way, it's like having a poster of a Corvette on your wall, and that doesn't mean that you drive a Corvette, right? It's very different. Just because older people use this as a framework doesn't mean that you have to as well.
I think that my most pertinent question to non-Jewish people who are currently under the assumption or opinion, I suppose, that they are practicing Kabbalah is why?
Yeah.
Why do they feel as though this is something that they're actually doing? Because from what has already been discussed, there's oral transmission. There's, you can't separate this from Jewish culture and life.
Yeah, there's tools necessary that just using a picture that was drawn 500 years ago and being like, great, we got it, we got everything, this is all we need, and then just like square peg round holing absolutely everything that you can find around it.
Pack it up, boys, we're going home.
That's right. So the question is asked, is there any place for Kabbalah in modern magic? So here's the thing. Having models is fine. It's fine. Whatever one you want to use, it's up to you. I mean, for me, Kabbalah doesn't connect very much. It doesn't seem like my thing. I'm only speaking for myself here. When you do look through the Zohar and you do look through other texts, it's like, man, this is amazing. It's eloquent, but it's also vast. It's so huge. And I guess I'm just an impatient person. I move on pretty quickly. But if anything, seeing Kabbalah work in the world, seeing how things are connected, much like the technical Hermetica, shows that there is some kind of a language to the universe. Don't stop there. True meaning comes from engagement with the world, not from some abstract contemplation of it. Let me offer up, and this is specifically applying to Hermetic and Practical Kabbalah, Cool Ranch Doritos. Saying that you understand the pure joy and delight and magnificence of a Cool Ranch Dorito chip. But then you buy a bag of this, and then you refuse to open the bag and just say, the bag is enough. That's it. That's all I have. Or even worse, it's just to dump the chips out and just be like, I've got the bag. It doesn't matter. You had people come up to you and they say like, hey man, how do those chips taste? And they taste any good? You say, well, yeah, let's look at the ingredients here. You've got this, you've got this. So if you combine them in your mind, I'm sure they taste great. Well, do you want to try one of those chips? No, it's all good. I've got the bag, man. It's all there. I mean, it's got blue. It's got a cool design to it. Everything that I need to know about the Cool Ranch chip is on the bag. And that's it. You still don't know the awesomeness of the chips themselves without tucking into that bag. For Kabbalah, that's life. That's living life, and that's seeing different models and different things out there to chance and take part of life, to not just meditate and sit and contemplate, which is great on their own terms. But as a magical, mystical framework, I don't know if it does it justice. Just having a filing cabinet to which everything that your magic revolves around is essential and key. That's the problem with esoteric models, especially ones that are overly textual, because for the most part, Hermetic Kabbalah and Practical Kabbalah is very textual. You've got charts, you have a Sephiroth, it's got colors, it's got gods attributed to it, but a lot of them are just like, why are they even there? Sure, I get it. Everything is connected. Awesome. Go further. So you can definitely have Kabbalah-informed thought. And in a way, I do. So this is my little slice of Kabbalistic love right here. And it comes from Isaac Luria. It's this idea of tikkun, or repair. Luria, he basically said that there was a twist, that God has some faults. It created the universe with things wrong in it, but that humans were created to correct this mistake. And since then, since Luria, there has been some interpretations that go even further. That this mistake was an unconscious mistake. And by that I mean that I'm sure this has happened to some of you, and I know it's happened to me. In fact, it happens quite frequently. That say you go to a friend's house and you have a great time, and you leave a personal item there, because you want to come back to that person's house. It's on purpose, but it's unconscious. So it's on purpose, but it's also not on purpose. How some interpretations go that this is how God put these mistakes in the world, so that God in some way has a dark side that even God doesn't know about. So in a way, by extension, we are here to assist and to help God to know itself better, to know the universe better, and to make things better. And that means getting out into the world and doing things. So I do love this concept, and this is very interesting to me. Would I call myself a Kabbalist? Never. But I like the idea of life being a saving force for all of the universe. Because again, life needs to be lived in. Kabbalah has much to inform your worldview. I find it has in some respects. And so I implore you to find out how it can as well. And there is plenty.
I think that I may catch some slack for this, but
Sure.
or flack rather, excuse me. I think that there really is this intriguing idea of everything being a fraction of God, of Hashem in some way.
Right.
Has really actually helped me inform my animism. And that includes, at least in a Jewish framework, shadim, which are sort of like demons, but not quite, but also kind of are. And that includes like literally everything. Everything has a bit of God in it.
Right.
And I think that that's just an incredible idea. Likewise, I mean, as you said, the concept of tikkun olam is, I think, a really incredible notion of caring for everything,
Yeah.
right? And that in saving one person, you're saving everybody, that you're able to actually have a mark on this world, and that is a force for good, I think is really amazing.
And it's not just you, it's you going out and doing things, right? Like it's you being able, by extension, to help, to assist in this repair, I find is a very, very helpful tonic for this world in this day and age, truthfully.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
It's such a wonderful, fantastic thought. And that's, that's why Luria and specifically the interpretations of Luria that came after him, that really sit and resonate with me. So yes, of course, you can have Kabbalah inform your worldview. I have, and I love this idea. It's maybe my favorite. Some final thoughts here, because we're coming to the end. I feel that we haven't really talked about what Kabbalah is or how to use it, and I'm kind of okay with that. I don't know if you're okay with that at all, but I think that there's countless websites, there's countless books, there's podcasts that go through it, especially from a practical Hermetic Kabbalah context. It has been done to death. How Kabbalists or people that use Kabbalah use it in the real world is very strained to me. I mean, I remember being younger and thinking that Kabbalah was the greatest thing on earth and reading Aleister Crowley's Magic Without Tears for the first time, and in I think the opening chapter of that, he talks about, going out of his house and attributing Kabbalistic correspondences to everything. I was like, whoa, that seems so cool. But really, now, with a bit of context and a bit of age, it's very strained to me. Seeing connections or meditating on these connections, it's a bit of a useless tool, I think, if you can be able to compartmentalize absolutely everything, to compartmentalize the most beautiful thing that we have, which is life. It is a cake screwdriver, and I'm using this example because it's fairly contemporaneous with everybody has seen the videos of certain objects that are, my God, that looks great, but it's just a piece of cake. I think that using some certain models that weren't supposed to be used as models in the first place is a bit of a useless tool. I don't get it, and I don't get why the need to have a place for absolutely everything is beneficial for a magician. Yeah, I think a lot of people have drank the Kool-Aid of a 19th century misuse of Kabbalah, and they see this somewhat false history of ritual magic that they take from the 19th century magicians, whatever you want to call them, that they took and drank this Kool-Aid, which was basically a Renaissance ad campaign. That these Renaissance magicians in the 15th and the 16th century, they wanted to see magic as a fantasy of some kind of divine knowledge that somehow transmuted to things like Kabbalah. But it was all the same thing, don't worry. It was all the same thing, and guess what? We got it from the Egyptians. It was just for the Egyptians. The Egyptians knew so much more than we do now. Great. But all these other forms, it just goes back to this pristine theological, this one thing. And then the 19th century, they wanted to be the 15th and 16th century. And then the 20th century, it wanted to be the 19th century. We're past that now. We know so much more about how magic was practiced historically. I think it's time to move on. And for people that still go to this framework, and this is something that I have to work through, or maybe not, it's actually quite fun, is that anytime modern magicians, they start to bring up anything that involves the tree of life or something like that, whether it be through tarot or any of these things, immediately when they say, oh yes, I was just spending some time in Malkuth, and then immediately when you do that, I see you holding a keytar. And I can't get over it. It might be the same thing that happens with when people have the word frauder in their names, and I can't not picture you wearing a baseball cap. It might be the same thing. Immediately when you say, oh yes, I was just doing some astral travel in Tippereth, it's like, bam, you get a keytar. How cool do you look now? Now, it doesn't mean that traditional Kabbalah isn't interesting. It is. It is incredibly interesting. It's a really cool thing. It's fantastic. But it's vast. It's vast. And it doesn't appeal to me. It just doesn't. Here's a piece of advice that I have for people beginning in magic, getting started. Steer clear of practical Hermetic Kabbalah as a framework. It doesn't do you any favors. I don't think it does you any favors at all.
I think that it's like the aspartame to the real sugar.
Yeah.
And that isn't to say that you should then jump immediately to actual Kabbalah, because I'm not. But it just doesn't make sense. There's no way for these disparate parts to function together for to use another metaphor, I guess, for the car to work with borrowed parts, with rubber bands, with tape, Yeah.
And it's the poster. You have the poster on the wall. It's like, oh yeah, I'm driving. It's like, no, you're not. There's a ballet poster on your wall. That's it. That's all you've got, right? You have a poster and some tacks and a wall. That's it. That's all you get. But I get the appeal. It is very mystical. But clearly I don't get why others think that it is the greatest magical framework that ever was, besides the fact that they're continually told that it is. So many promulgate its greatness. There's so many books. Starting out, I say steer clear. Circle back later if you want. If you really want to, go for it, for sure. But I say when you start, look back to classical antiquity, specifically in a Western framework, if you want to stay within the Western magical tradition. Start there. Start with Hellenistic Alexandria. Start with the era of the Greek magical papyri. That's for me, if you want historical mysticism and magic, that's mainly where I go back. That's about as far as I go back within like an actual written documents that we can look at and go like, this is magic, right? For too often beginners are told that Hermetic Kabbalah is a given in the Western magical tradition. It's not. Nothing is a given in magic except for one thing, that leaning into areas that excite you and doing it practically, engaging with it in this world, weird shit happens. That is the only given in magic. And that's great. So with that, Tanin, that's the end of the episode.
We did it. I think that the conversations around what appropriation is and isn't, we're going to continue to have those for the next forever, probably. And I think that that's good. I think that it's important to realize that there is an entire, not only lifetime, but multiple lifetimes worth of harm that has been done, and recognizing that the removal of Kabbalah from a Jewish context, from the Jewish people, and this attempt to shoehorn it into a Christian framework, an attempt to shoehorn it into a place where it doesn't belong, has not only harmed people genuinely, but it is also considerably weakened where we are today, I think, as magicians. The fact that there's an entire system, supposed system, I guess, of magic that rests on the shoulders of these people is embarrassing and sad and sickening at the same time, I I would love it if Eliphas Levi is never spoken of again. His real name was Alphonse Louis Constant.
Constant, yeah.
And Eliphas Levi was his Jew sona, as I call it.
Oh, like it.
Yeah, and this stuff still happens. It's still going on. We just have to do better. We owe it to ourselves and to the people who came before us.
Absolutely. That's an even better sentiment to end on, Tanin. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tanin. This has been excellent.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. So for those people interested, head to whatmagicisthis.com. There you will find a way to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes as well as Spotify. Truthfully, if they have podcasts, I'm listed. I'm on pretty much every platform, even YouTube. Can't wait for the comments for this one. It's going to be excellent. Also on whatmagicisthis.com, you can find a way to find me on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. On whatmagicisthis.com, you can also find show notes for each and every show that I do. I do a ton of show notes. The show notes for this one are going to be excellent, guys. I've been very excited about the show notes for this one because there is going to be some excellent places to go if you are truly, truly, truly interested in not just the history of Kabbalah, but in certain works and books that have Kabbalah in a really wonderful light. Please check out the show notes on whatmagicisthis.com. If you like the program, please leave a review either on iTunes or on Stitcher or any other place you can leave an iTunes. I know people like to click the little star clicky thing. That's cool. If you want to say a few words about me, that is very much appreciated. I love it. Somebody recently called me the Canadian occult Henry Rollins, which I'll take it. I'll take it.
What an incredible honor that is.
I know, isn't it? It's great. I had a chance to meet Henry. He's a nice guy. He's a great guy. Let's say that. But I was very flattered. So whoever said that, thank you so much. But yes, leave a review. Also, if you like the podcast, please tell a friend. If they're a weirdo like you are, hopefully they'll like the show as well. And sharing is caring. Guess what, guys? Now I have a Patreon. Tanin is a patron of my show. It's only $7 a month. You can come in and I've got some extra content there. The patrons get to pick the content. The patrons get to pick what topics I talk about on What Magic Is This. Every month is different. It's wonderful. Putting you on the spot. How are you enjoying your time on Patreon so far, Tanin?
I've loved it. I think that all of the stuff that you've been putting out, all of the work that you've been doing to really foster the community that we have there has been great. It's nice to feel as though I'm not the sole listener, I guess, of What Magic Is This, that I have tons of other people to connect with.
That's going to be good. And who knows, one of these days I might start one of those Discord things. I don't know how to do that, but we'll get it done. I'm just like, yeah, sure, let's do a Discord. But Tana, thank you for being a patron, and thank you again also for just wanting to come on the show, because we've had these wonderful conversations, and I've had a relationship with a lot of people that listen to the show, and I've always valued what interactions that we have, and so thank you for supporting. It's great. I absolutely love it.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Oh, it's pleasure's all mine, truly. Say you guys don't want to do the Patreon thing, the $7 a month thing, but this episode meant as much to you as, say, a video rental did back in 1992. I have a PayPal me button on my website on whatmagicisthis.com. Just click that. Every little bit helps. It truly does. I'm not picky. Send me 1 cent. Send me $500. Send me $500,000. I don't care. But yeah, it's just great to feel loved by some way, because I do a ton of work on this show. I really do. I spend days on this stuff. I spend days and days on it. WhatMagicIsThis.com has all of that. Tanin, that's the end of the show. Are you ready for the post-show quid pro quo?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. So we don't have to stay within Kabbalah here, but if you want to answer Kabbalah, that's totally cool. But is there a mystical thought that really appeals to you or helps you in your life, the way that, say, the idea of repair, and life is here to repair the universe, that you see the universe and it helps you in an interesting way? Is there a mystical thought that really appeals to you? And if you can, share it.
I think for me the most helpful is animism, just basic animism, which isn't really basic at all when you think about it for even 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But just this idea that everything is alive. Some things might be more alive than others. If you are sort of based in that Japanese idea of items reaching 100 years, then they're suddenly people. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, that's just like the most useful thing that I have is somebody who is living in 2020 America. It's trying to divorce us from the spiritual world as much as possible.
I love it as well. I've done a whole episode about it. Yeah, animism's that's the epistemology that I go to immediately, and it is a wonderful thing. Tanin, this has been an absolute pleasure. I would hope that if I was to ask you to come back on the show at some point, you would.
Oh, absolutely. No question.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you for everything you do. And I wish you the absolute best of luck. And we shall not stay strangers. We interact quite a bit on the old the Twitter, the Bird app as it is called. So
Bird Hell site, yes.
the Bird Hell site these days, boy howdy, it's an interesting place. But yeah, I think I can only do spurts of like 5 minutes right now, and I'm just like, I gotta go. I can't do this anymore. But yes, I'm on there, as is Tanin. So come say hi if you feel like it. That's the show, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Come on back to What Magic Is This? We'll talk about some of this crazy, esoteric, occult, wonderful, interesting, magical craziness that you all love and enjoy. So until then, stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay luminous.
Goodbye.
All right, everybody. We'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.
Amen.